Energy, be it efficiency or capture or any of those things, is a major driving force of evolution in all organisms, and we're going to look at some examples here. This entire section is basically a series of illustrated examples applied to various forms of life. For example, in the top right picture here, parts of Utah's Great Salt Lake have salt concentrations of 32%, which is 10 times saltier than seawater. But despite these harsh conditions, the lake's distinctive colors come from photosynthetic pigments produced by trillions of archaeans. Okay, archaeans are extremophiles. They are going to be living in these odd environments. We realize that bacteria have evolved to fill almost every form of nutrition that we have ever figured out. And they can be categorized into four groups based on how they obtain energy and carbon to build the organic molecules that make them up. Nutritional diversity is greater among prokaryotes than among all eukaryotes, and every type of nutrition is found here. Some of them even may be unique to prokaryotes. Organisms that obtain energy from light are phototrophs. Organisms that attain energy from chemicals are chemotrophs. Organisms that need only an inorganic compound, like CO2 as a carbon source, are autotrophs, and organisms that require at least one organic nutrient, such as glucose, as a carbon source are heterotrophs. So we can combine that. So photoautotrophs are going to be photosynthetic organisms that harness light energy to drive the synthesis of organic compounds from inorganic compounds. Cyanobacteria, for example, are photoautotrophic prokaryotes, and you can see them on the bottom right. Plants and algae, they tend to fall under this category. Chemoautotrophs need only an inorganic molecule like CO2 as a carbon source, but obtain their energy by oxidizing inorganic substances. This could be something like hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, ferrous ions, and this is unique to prokaryotes, and this is something you're going to see in like deep water black smokers, like on the top right. Photoheterotrophs use light to generate ATP, but obtain their carbon in organic form. And this is again restricted to just a few marine and halophilic prokaryotes, so salt-loving. Chemoheterotrophs must consume organic molecules for both energy and carbon. This is found widely in prokaryotes, protists, fungi, animals, and even some parasitic plants. You are a chemoheterotroph. And so we see that that's a big sort of structure here. We also get into this problem of obligate and facultative. You can have organisms, for example, that are obligate aerobes that require O2 for cellular respiration. We are an obligate aerobe. But you might have something that is an obligate anaerobe that can be poisoned by O2 and use either fermentation or anaerobic respiration, in which inorganic molecules other than O2 accepts electrons. You might have facultative anaerobes that use O2 if it's present, but can also grow by fermentation in an anaerobic environment. We have some capability there with fermentation, but not really a long-term structure. You also have sort of strange situations like the heterocysts of cyanobacteria or the other nitrogen-fixing prokaryotes. They can convert nitrogen to form things that are able to be incorporated into organic molecules. Nitrogen-fixing cyanobacteria are the most self-sufficient organisms on Earth, requiring only light energy, CO2, into water and some minerals to grow. And that's really it, okay? So definitely we see that prokaryotes have evolved to fill every combination of energy, shape, and function on the planet, which is unique. Plants have a wide variety of energy effects, but most of it comes down into water efficiency, light absorption, and nutrient acquisition. Xerophytes, for example, have evolutionary adaptations that reduce evaporative water loss. Basically, we deal with that water loss in a wide variety of situations, but many species of deserts avoid drying out by completing their short life cycles during brief rainy seasons. Like the octio here, you can see when it's wet, they produce the leaves. When it's dry, they all fall off and it's stored in the stem. So there's going to be less loss. You might have something like the old man cactus that uses the light coloration to reflect light, or maybe something like the oleander that has this crypt where the stoma are there, and that's going to be able to modify the humidity, and that's going to be able to control some of that water loss, making it less. You might have things with nutrient acquisition. So like on the bottom right, we see these root nodules. The root nodules grow. Basically, it's a purposeful infection from the plant. So they attract bacteria to the roots and they grow inside these anaerobic nodules. Why? The anaerobic nodules are going to be full of obligate anaerobic nitrogen fixing bacteria. So they encourage the fixation of nitrogen within the plant by purposely allowing that infection to occur, and that's going to be valuable. You also have water acquisition changes, like the deep roots of perennial grasses compared to the shallow roots of annual plants. Or you might do something like with shoot architecture, basically phyllotaxy, the arrangement of leaves on a stem. It's going to be determined by the meristems, which are the stem cells of the plant, and it leaves the leaves arranged in an ascending spiral around the stem. Basically, each leaf is going to emerge at about 137.5 degrees from the previous one. Why? It's going to minimize the shade of the lower leaves by those above it. So there's many different ways that plants have evolved for energy capture, water capture, nutrient acquisition. Some of the more complicated ones are the epiphytes and parasites and carnivorous plants. Epiphytes nourish themselves but grow on other plants, while parasitic plants extract nutrients from other plants. So an epiphyte is an autotrophic plant, but it's going to grow like on the branches or trunks of trees, like we can see here with this staghorn fern or something like an orchid maybe. Most mosses are epiphytic. They don't harm what they're growing on, or at least they're not intending to. They're not feeding off of them, they're just growing on them. Parasitic plants are going to be extracting nutrients to supplement or even replace the production of organic molecules by photosynthesis. Many parasitic plants have roots that function as nutrient-absorbing projections that then pierce into the host plant. Mistletoe, for example, supplements its photosynthesis by using those nutrient-absorbing projections, or haustoria, to siphon sap from the vascular tissue of the host. Some parasitic plants don't perform photosynthesis at all. The dodder, for example, is going to tap into the vascular tissue for both water and nutrients and is not going to produce anything of its own. And you might have even other parasites that don't feed directly on the plant, but feed on plants' symbiotic fungi, the mycorrhizae, and that's something like the Indian pipe. Carnivorous plants are a little bit different. They are photosynthetic, but they obtain some nitrogen and minerals by killing and digesting insects and other small animals. They typically live in acidic bogs and other habitats where the soil conditions are poor, and they've evolved through various modifications of leaves and digestive juices. Something like the Venus flytrap you can see on the left, or the sundew on the far right. Pitcher plants, for example, is a very common one. Each pitcher contains a slightly viscous fluid that's used to drown the prey, and there's sort of a slick, waxy coating that slips them in. Carnivorous habitats, we see, again, it's only going to occur in certain situations when the soil is poor. Venus flytraps and pitcher plants, and even some form of sundews, can be found in South Carolina, but they're typically like in the Lewis Ocean bays, and you might have seen them before and not even noticed it, because only when the soil conditions are right will they produce these expensive nutrient capturing carnivorous components. Otherwise, they just look like a leafy green plant. Energy shapes evolution in animals as well. You can tell a lot about the diet of an organism by its dentition. Carnivores are going to have the more incisors and canines, so the ripping and tearing, whereas herbivores are going to have premolar, the more flat grinding surfaces, and omnivores like humans are going to have both. So we actually end up using basically satellite mapping technologies to map our teeth, and you can tell a lot about diet. That's reflected in our intestines. Okay, the small intestine is going to be specialized for digesting complex proteins and things like meat, so we need a lot of small intestines. But the colon's main job is to reabsorb water from that. So carnivores are going to have much more small intestines and very little colon. Whereas an herbivore, it's going to have a very little small intestine because most of what they're eating is going to be digested in this secondary structure called a cecum. The cecum is kind of like a cow's stomach, where it's full of bacteria that allow for the digestion of cellulose. That requires lots of bacteria and lots of water. So as that then enters the colon, the water can be absorbed. So you see a very long colon in the herbivores. Other ways that organisms deal with that cellulose problem, cows have 4 stomachs full of bacteria, a series of reactions, symbiotic microbes in these pouches that are going to allow for the digestion, slow and steady. So the cows are going to have it, it's going to break down, they'll basically regurgitate it, chew it again and again. It's going to be cycling around and around and around until enough of that nutrient has been extracted. So basically, the cows are living on the bacterial products and the plants are feeding the bacteria. Or you might have something like bunny rabbits that are caprophagic, and that means that they're going to eat some of their feces so that the food passes through their alimentary canal a second time, sometimes even more than that, each time getting a little bit more energy out of that cellulose as it's not very efficient. So energy definitely has an impact on all organisms, including us.